We're running, right? Thank you. All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm John Matola, Vice Chair of the Fairfield Board of Finance. Welcome to our October 3rd regular meeting. I'm filling in for Ms. Charlton, who is out of town today. We have a pretty full agenda, but hopefully we can get this through rather quickly. We have two matters involving the WPCA authorizations regarding pump stations. We're going to get an update on Penfield Pavilion from Mr. Tom Bremer and CFO Jared Schmidt. We're going to get an update on the flood study related to Penfield. We're also going to get an update on the DPW paving plan. And then we're going to have some updates from various Board of Finance committees. And then we have to consider two minutes. So I forgot to have us stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. So let's do that now, then we'll get cracking. Thank you. All right, so the first matter on the agenda is item number 3. I'm going to read it. It's and the backup for this, if I have the right page, it's page 1 of the backup that's online. So bear with me for a minute. Item number 3 is Water Pollution Control Authority to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Whereas on June 27th, 2022, the RTM approved $300,000 for the design of the Fairfield Beach Pump Station, including the force main. And whereas on October 24th, 2022, the RTM approved $300,000 for the design of the Center Street Pump Station, including the force main. And whereas on October 24th, 2022, the RTM approved $300,000 for the design of the South Pine Creek Pump Station, including the force main. And whereas the WPCA has determined that the design of the 3 pump stations is more efficiently conducted as a single project, and whereas in order to be eligible for grant funding, the State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP, requires additional investigation of conditions relating to the pump stations, as well as the hiring of qualified design consultant under DEEP's quality-based selection QBS program, and whereas the estimated additional cost to be in compliance with the QBS program and to be eligible for grant funding is $336,000. And now therefore be resolved that in accordance with the recommendation of the WPCA, the previous 3 authorizations of $300,000 each in funding for the design of Fairfield Beach, Center Street, and South Pine Creek pump stations and force mains are combined, and that $336,000 is added to the authorization to create a single appropriation of WPCA fund balance in the amount of $1,236,000, phase 1, to design the pump stations and comply with DEEP's QBS program. Could I have a motion to put this before us? Mr. Testani, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. And we have, I believe, Mr. John Bodie, who's the superintendent of the WPCA. Who else do we have here today? Anybody else, or is it just you and Jared on this? Okay, so I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. My job's done because you just read the whole thing, and your members made you read the whole thing. So no. So I just have to summarize because I'm going to talk about the mechanics of this and the procedure, what's happened in the past. So there were 3 projects that got approved within the past year or so, a little bit longer than the past year. These are design projects for pump stations. They were each estimated to be $300,000. What we're proposing in this is to combine all those projects into one single project. And so in that sense, This is not an additional authorization of funding. It's $900,000. However, there's another aspect to this, which is the QBS program that you referenced, Mr. Chairman. And this is would put the town in compliance with DEEP, so that we'll be eligible to seek grant funding from DEEP, clean water funding from DEEP for the overall project, not so much for the design, but for the construction of the project. And it's quality-based selection is the program. And with that comes a requirement that they dig a little bit deeper on the investigation and the design aspect of the project. So the additional amount here, we have the 900,000, which has already been authorized for each of the three projects. We're just combining that into one. And then the additional authorization here is for 336,000 related to the additional investigation and the QBS program, so that these projects can be considered for clean water grants in the future.
Any questions? Ms. Marmion, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. They're all related, but so number one, there are no cost savings in terms of combining these three projects into one. It's the same cost regardless. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. There might be a little bit of savings because we're doing three projects at one time, so we might be combining them might lessen the amount of hours that the engineering firm has to work on certain aspects. So there might be some. This number is not to exceed, so there is some room for negotiation, so to speak.
I see. And then what is the additional $336,000 that QBS, like meeting their standards? What does that involve beyond, I believe it's hiring a qualified design consultant, which I would have assumed we would have done anyway, but then you're saying dig deeper. What does that mean exactly?
With the QBS program, you have to, the initial step was to request qualified firms to apply to do the design. There was 6 of them, and we had packages. We read through them. We scored each engineering firm, picked the top 3. Then we interviewed them. They did a presentation. So these engineers need to be a little more qualified, a little more experienced, and they need to look into permitting, flood zones. There's a whole lot more that QBS is looking for. The DEEP. In the past, DEEP would pay for designs. Just, we'll pay for a design. And then everybody said, well, let's design this. Well, no, it didn't work. Put it on the shelf. Let's design this. So now they want quality stuff, well thought out, well planned. Not to say that this engineering firm, whatever design they come up with, they have to present it to DEEP before it goes any further. So if DEEP says this doesn't conform, that it's dead in the water, nothing's paid.
I see. And just one last question. What do you think, I mean, what's your experience in terms of the amount of the grant that you might get by going this extra mile? And how confident are you that you might get that grant that would cover this extra funding?
We spoke to a few people at DEEP initially, and their advice to us was there was money there. There's not a lot of projects coming forward. So they said, do what you have to do and present it to us, because if they approve it, if they like the design, and we take the design to construction, we can apply to have that money reimbursed.
Thank you.
Can I dovetail off that?
Sure. Do you have?
Just real
Go ahead, Mr. Sista.
Just to follow Ms. Marmion's question. So when you say get reimbursed, is it the 900,000 would get reimbursed?
It all depends on what DEEP and the Clean Water Fund has available, and it would be up to them to decide how much money gets reimbursed.
That's all right. And, but the reimbursement you're talking about is possibly the cost of the work, not just the design, right?
Yep, it could encompass the construction as well as the design.
All right. All right.
And the typical grant is about 20% of the construction
Okay.
cost. And there's also the possibility of getting a lower rate if we have to borrow, when you have to borrow the money, that's a possibility as well.
All right.
So getting a lower rate than what the normal market rate would be if we were to bond money.
Mr. DeWitt, you had your hand up. Ms. Leclerc, go ahead.
It's a requirement for the Clean Water Fund. Like I said in the past, they paid for designs that weren't really well thought out. They said, here's the money, go design it. And then people were just doing design after design after design and never doing it. So now they want you to take the time, do something a quality design. They look at it. Once they give the approval, it moves forward and you've got a better shot at it. I'm not saying it's a 100% shot, but it's a better shot.
Mr. Curley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McCullough. And thank you for that information. I understand this is all for the design phase, but I trust that this work, while you can't know an estimate of the actual project work until the design is complete, but I trust that it's on the capital waterfall at some point or some place. Do we have a ballpark on what the overall project would cost and when that would be incurred?
Cost for construction?
The whole project, not just the design work.
Don't think we have anything concrete. We do have something on the capital plan.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you. I imagine it's a placeholder until the design work is done, but I'm just curious as to what the expectation was when that was put on the waterfall.
Yeah, that's right. It is on the waterfall. John's got the sheet right in front of him.
Yeah, right now, the construction for the Fairfield Beach Road pump station itself is, I'll round it up, 2.4 million. The Beach Road force main would be 1.9 million. Pine Creek Station, 2.8. Pine Creek force main, 800,000. And then
I think those are the first year of it. Most of these are split up over multiple years. And so if I had to ballpark it, I'd say $15 million for the three projects.
15 million as a placeholder for the total project.
For all three of these pump stations.
Yep.
And the force mains.
Okay. Yeah, I think understanding that you were forced until we have designs to take our best guess with estimates, but I would be curious as the design work comes through to keep track of that $15 million benchmark and let us know. My guess is based on history that the actual forecast will be higher, but hopefully we're in the right ballpark. No further questions. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. DeWitt?
Yeah, just to thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So if we don't approve this, we still have 900 already allocated, but we don't have access to the grant.
we don't have access to clean water funding, reimbursement, or construction grants. or
Any
loans.
reimbursement.
Correct.
Okay, so without this 336, there's no reimbursement for this at all. It would be 100% Fairfield expense.
Pretty much. We've been looking for grants and loans and
Uh-huh.
everything and just, they're not there.
Okay, all right, perfect. Because, it's, Mr. Schmidt just said it's 20%, that's 180,000, my simple math, right? And, just the value proposition would say, oh, we're paying 340 to get 180. But if we have absolutely no access to any of that money, then that's, seems like it makes monetary sense anyway, just to at least avoid the risk of not having anything, right?
Follow up?
But if we get the grant for 20%, that's of the full construction cost. So that'd be
So that's
20%.
full construction. Oh, yeah, I'm only
15.
looking at design, so yeah,
Right.
that's substantial. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you.
You have to spend money to make money sometimes, right? Learned that playing cards when I was a youth. Okay, any other questions from anybody? All right, seeing none. I'm not going to read number 3 again. Motion to waive the reading. Ms. Marmion, Mr. Testani, all in favor? Aye. Okay, I'm going to entertain a motion to approve item number 3. Mr. Testani, seconded by Ms. Leclerc. All in favor? It's unanimous for the members here. Thank you very much. All right. All right, we're on to item number 4. It's Water Pollution Control Authority to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolve that in accordance with a recommendation from the WPCA, funding of up to $235,000 from the WPCA fund balance for quality-based selection, QBS, of a design consultant for Toll House, Mill River, Eastfield, and Willow Street pump stations and force mains investigation, Phase 2B, and hereby is approved. Can I have a motion to put this item before us? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Ms. Marion. Again, we have Mr. Bodie and Jared here to present this item. I suspect it's similar to item number 3. Is that a fair statement? Okay, do you have anything else you need to add about this item?
These are the remaining 4 pump stations within the town. This is not such a deep dive. This is more an investigation on structures, easements, hydraulic capacity, stuff like that. Background information that we can use in future design, which we hope will be in 3 or 4 years. This information really doesn't get old or it's reliable to use down the road. So the company that we selected to do Phase 1 gave us a price for doing the work on Phase 2.
Jared, do you have anything to add on this?
No, just to say that these projects are also on the WPCA capital plan. They're further out into the future beyond so being Phase 2, they are beyond it, probably starting in 2027 or so.
Okay, any questions on this item? Okay. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve item number 4. Mr. Testani, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. Any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, all in favor? It's unanimous for the members here. Thank you very much for coming by. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to move along to item number 5 to hear an update on Penfield Pavilion. This is going to be presented by CAO Tom Bremer and CFO Jared Schmidt. Good evening, Mr. Bremer. How are you? Good seeing you. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Good evening. It's good to see everybody. Penfield. We are beginning construction as we speak. I have sent in backup materials a letter that was, if you looked at the date, just received a few days ago from FEMA. The 2 things that we talked about before we were going to start construction was we needed to be sure that FEMA was going to be comfortable with our construction design to fix the grade beams. And FEMA would also be happy with the way we were breaking down under the 50-50 rule. Excuse me. And the letter says both of those things. I had a previous meeting with them in early September where I had gone through everything at the time with them, and this was the follow-up to that meeting. So all in all, a very good letter, and we're going to move forward on that side. The second thing is builder's risk policy. And I asked FEMA in the letter, I don't know if you had a chance to read the letter, but the letter talks about if we failed to get insurance. And there was a number of either emails I received or read. I'm not sure if it was directed to me, but there were, as I think about it, there was some issues raised about, well, if we can't get insurance, perhaps that would enable us to get out from underneath, for lack of a better phrase, some of the FEMA requirements. And I raised that with FEMA, and they confirmed in their letter that no, that would not be the case, that our ability or inability to get insurance would not waive any of the FEMA requirements. So I asked them to put that in writing as well, which they did. But we have risks, builder's risk insurance policy, very typical of the other builder's risk insurance policies we have on other projects. And so we're moving forward. There have been a number of design changes to what we're going to be doing at Penfield, and I don't mean to get into the weeds with you, so I'll leave it at that. But having said that, we are very, very shortly going to be in a position where we can put out a new schedule in terms, and we'll put it out on the website. You can certainly take a look at it, and it'll give you even a more detailed sense of what we'll be doing when, what days, that kind of thing. If you've been down at Penfield, excuse me, at all. If you've been down at all at Penfield, you've seen basically pipes going in all around Penfield. And in fact, I've seen reports from people saying, this is not ADA compliant, et cetera, et cetera. What they fail to recognize is we're going to be shutting down that whole sidewalk real shortly, within days. Why are we putting all these pipes in? Because we're going to put a fence up. Why do we have to put a fence up around it? Because we're going to be digging out all contaminated dirt and fill and all that kind of stuff. And we have to contain it within the fence, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all happening as we speak. I don't know at what hour we will have everything done, but certainly in the next week or two, the fence will all be up. We expect to start, and again, if I get too much in the weeds, please tell me. The plan is we're going to be remediating what we call the hot spots. There's 8 spots primarily around the building and under the parking lot. We're going to remediate those spots first. And the reason we're going to be remediating those spots first is we don't want to have a whole bunch of construction people coming on site that have to wear hazmat suits and stuff like that. We're going to take the worst stuff out. We're going to remediate that like we've done the other 40 plus sites. And once all the worst contaminants are removed, that's when we're going to bring in the Army to start taking down the decks and really do things primarily under the building and that sort of thing, which you have all heard about way too often. So that's really like the phase 1 that we're doing. That's going to begin in the next few weeks. I don't have a specific day yet, but it's in the next few weeks time frame. How long is that going to take? It's probably going to take a good 3 to 4, maybe even 5 weeks to accomplish. Once those hotspots are accomplished, are completed, then we're going to start what I call the major construction, where we basically remove the decks and do all the stuff to prepare for what we need to do under the building. Then we're going to start digging under the building, et cetera, et cetera. So that's basically where Penfield is. The other issue that I think was raised in preparation for this meeting was, well, where are we with the bids? We were hoping to get them in August, and we were hoping to start right after Labor Day. The operative word there is hope. We were hoping. And one of the things that we realized, and was as we were going out for bids, was we had a lot of people come in with a lot of interest. And so we had a number of requests to extend the time in which they had to respond to the bids. So we did give them the more time. Bids have been received. They were just received last week. We are just in the process now of sitting down and basically negotiating with subcontractors, et cetera, et cetera. And I hope to finish that probably in the next few weeks as well. We're going to go ahead with the remediation on the hotspots as part of the 40 site remediation. So we don't need the people who are going to be working under the building, although they could be the same person. That's whether or not we solve the bid problem or the bid issues. That's not going to affect going ahead with the hotspots. So we're going to do that. And we're going to take the next few weeks to figure out exactly who's going to get the bids and what's the overall cost going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And once we have a sense of that, then I can come back and discuss budgets and all that kind of stuff. But right now, I don't really have answers to those questions. So that's a quick and dirty update. I'm happy to answer any question anybody has on Penfield.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bremer. Mr. DeWitt, I saw your hand up first. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Bremer, for the update. I'm glad to hear that we're not waiting. The hotspot, you know, it would just like if we were remediating Goldman or anything else, right? So
That's exactly right. And that's the way we're treating it.
I think that's a wise approach, and then we can do that in parallel while you're working everything else. The FEMA, I have to tell you, no, I'm not a lawyer, but the FEMA letter, that one paragraph about the insurance just seems really ominous. And, you know, here's why it's ominous to me. So you asked a question, they say, please be advised if a community participating in the National Flood Insurance Program is unable to obtain insurance, this doesn't waive the requirements. Okay, I get it, right? And non-compliance would not only result in a change in class of the community rating system, but would also jeopardize the community's standing in the National Flood Insurance Program, as a participating community is responsible for administering and enforcing local floodplain. So I thought a lot of the reason that we were doing all this stuff at Penfield was so that we didn't lose the National Flood Insurance Program. So I'm confused by, is this just a government CYA a little bit, or is this really something that could, even though we did all this stuff, could all those people that were so worried about losing their flood insurance still lose their flood insurance, even if we went to all these extreme measures?
My sense of things is no, I don't believe that. I think this is their way of nicely saying that we want you to move forward quickly on this project. They don't, A, don't wait, and B, there are no excuses to move forward. And so, you know, when I asked them about the question of insurance and stuff, I think I don't want to put my head in their head, but my sense is this a way for you to kind of buy more time before you decide what you're going to do? And I've gone overboard with them saying, no, we're going forward, we're going forward, we're going forward. So I had the sense, I read the same thing in the letter that you did, and I had the same reaction. But my sense is, no, if we go forward on the time frame we're talking about, you know, we haven't gone forward, we haven't spent any real money, we haven't really gone into it. When I believe once they see the Army there and doing the whole thing and we're taking decks down and everything, all this is going to go away and they're going to be very happy. But until that happens, I think they're going to say stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sorry, but do I still have the floor for?
Yeah,
If
go
I may.
ahead.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? If they, you know, they don't want to give us another, you know, opportunity to push this out a year. Of course, I don't think anybody wants to. So thank you for that. And I can understand their reluctance to commit here and say, yeah, no, you'll be covered, right? So, how are we coming along with getting the insurance? Is this, I mean, are we going to get somebody to insure us?
It's done. You already have it. I have a builder's risk policy already.
Okay.
So we're done.
So, that's the builder's policy.
Yeah, that's
okay.
the policy we've been
Okay.
talking about. Because there was an issue raised saying if we can't get builder's risk insurance policy,
Okay.
can we get, you know, will that enable us to, somebody's quoted some regulations and stuff, which don't really apply. And so I talked to them about it and I wanted them to respond as they saw fit, and this is what their response was. So they said it to me orally, and I said, could you put that in writing? And that's what they did.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Before you follow up, I forgot to say to the public, the backup starts on 5. There's only 6 pages, the entire backup, so pages 5 and 6 relate to this subject. Mr. Curley wants to follow up on Mr. DeWitt's questioning. Go ahead.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Mr. Bremer, for the presentation and the information. It's certainly appreciated. I had a slightly different interpretation of that paragraph. And I do think it's moot, but I did want to share my thoughts and see if it aligned with your expectations as well. But I think that question about whether not being able to obtain insurance would allow us to somehow avoid this whole project. That has been floating around town for a number of months, so I appreciate that you asked the question. I do think that to the extent that we have insurance and we're moving forward, it makes all of this paragraph moot, right? But my interpretation of that was if we were not able to get insurance, we have to do something. And that, I think the only other alternative at that point was probably take the building down so that we would get into compliance that way. But,
Well, I think to answer that, I mean, there are so many things that we self-insure. We can always self-insure as well. And so I'm not advocating that, but certainly that would be one avenue that we could go down if we had to. But short of that, I wanted to make sure that anyone who read this letter would come away with, or at least the way I look at it is, as I read the letter, the fact that we can or cannot get insurance, we still have to comply with the law, and it's kind of irrelevant to them.
Yeah, so you're on the insurance? Okay.
so you mentioned we have a policy in hand. Are there any details that you can share with the board in terms of, its insurance rating, or is it a company that we would recognize? Is it?
Well, it was, we used our outside, Assured Partners as our outside consultant. That's our broker. We used Kerma as well, and they were able to get a policy through, excuse me, Lloyd's of London. So I don't know how familiar you are with them, but I'm pretty familiar with them from my previous life. But as I said earlier, the best way I can describe it is it's a builder's risk policy. It's your standard builder's risk policy.
Okay, that's helpful in terms of the who, and I appreciate that you're still going through a lot of the information regarding bids and such, but back in March, you had provided a best guess or estimate as to what the project cost would be. You had mentioned that the cost of insurance was included in your numbers. Did the cost of this policy compare with expectations? Was it cheaper? Was it more expensive? I imagine if it took us a while to get that, perhaps the pool of insurers was not deep, and I'm concerned that the cost may be high.
One thing I'm very concerned about is the cost of this entire project, and the insurance is a piece of it. In the Board of Selectmen meetings that I've been before, and when we talked about updating Penfield, Mr. Flynn, who has some experience in insurance, on a number of occasions said, it's going to be more expensive than you think, it's going to be harder to get than you think. And he was absolutely right. So it is more expensive than we had in our budget. And of course, that's a cause for concern, et cetera. But as I said earlier, once I don't have a sense yet of the overall budget, and I won't have that until I'm done with all the bids. So I don't know if the amount that it's over a couple $100,000 over what we thought. And I'm being told that if you wanted to build this building down in Florida, you wouldn't be able to get insurance. So it is what it is. So we're dealing with it as best we can. And until I have my overall budget numbers, this is only a piece. So until I have the overall budget numbers, I'd rather not get into, I want to do this and I want to do that. We need to finish the whole project in terms of the budget first. And then I can have a more intelligent conversation about what to do about the insurance.
Did you have questions, Jack Testani? I see your hand up earlier.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thanks, John. Hey, Tom, how are you? Thanks for coming. I just have a couple questions. Number one, on the insurance cost, I know you were just talking about it, and you want to get the numbers for the budget finalized. I understand all that. I speaking for myself, as you're going through these expenses, I personally would like to see, like what you're expending and when. So this is, just say, as an example, you create a spreadsheet, okay? this is how much the town just spent on insurance, whatever that number is. This is what the town's gonna spend on lumber, whatever that number is, at the time you spend it. So let's say for our October 19th meeting, or maybe the first official regular board meeting in November, we get like where you are in terms of what the costs are. I know you want to get to a whole budget. I understand that. I just think as we come across these numbers, you just randomly, no offense, you just randomly throw out $200,000 above what we thought. I'm not sure what that means in terms of what the town dollars are. Like, what was the actual expense? That's number one. Number two, just out of curiosity's sake, on the FEMA letter, it sounds, I agree with Mr. DeWitt, it sounds a lot like legal jargon, but, you know, after doing this for my living, I understand contracts and, you know, verbiage like this. So where it says that in the second paragraph, the town, quote, may look to make improvements, but will communicate to FEMA in advance to ensure the community is under the substantial improvement threshold. Does that mean that they're going to have someone come and inspect? Just help me to understand exactly what that means in FEMA's world, if you understand what they're looking for.
I understand exactly what you're saying. But before I get into that, I don't mean to be flip about $200,000 by any stretch of the imagination.
That's good.
Yeah, no. I don't mean to be flip about it at all. So.
Good answer, Tom.
Well, I'm very sensitive to the overall budget, and I'm very sensitive to what the town's going through in order to fix this and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to do everything I can to stay within budget, et cetera, et cetera. And to your point about a more detailed, we will have, once I have the budgets all worked out, part of that is we have to go in with our construction manager, and we're going to be signing a contract wherein all these costs are laid out and stuff. So we'll have a very good sense of, you know, within reason, everything's going to cost and when we're going to be spending it. And I have no problem. That'll be publicized, and, you know, there's nothing to be hidden. What was the second part of your question? Oh, what do they mean by changes? Part of the discussion I had with FEMA was the 50-50 rule. And I don't want to be flip about that either. We kind of glossed over it in my presentation. But the 50-50 rule is very, very important for obvious reasons. If you go above 50%, I know you all know this, but if we go over 50%, we have a whole host of other problems. So the issue became exactly what's included in the 50-50 and what's not included. And I know we've discussed this in the past. And so they were agreeable to the way I wanted to structure the 50-50 rule. And in answer to a question that they gave me in my meeting, which was, well, are you doing anything else to the building? I thought, being very honest and transparent, I said to them, well, listen, if in fact the budget goes very well and there's money left over, there's a whole list of things that people would like to add to the building to do. Can we change the wall coverings? Can we change this? Can we change that? And what I said to them was, look, if that's in fact the case that we have the extra money, I will come back to FEMA and tell them what other enhancements we are doing. But as I said to them, I'm very mindful of the 50-50, and I want to be as below it as I can be relative to the 50-50 rule. Now, to answer your question, will they come back and inspect and that sort of thing? At the end of this whole process, I'm going for FEMA approval. They've got to basically certify that I am not now under the NOV. The NOV has been approved, has been alleviated. And I'm expecting them to come back not only for inspections, but I'm expecting them to come back to audit our books as well. So under that scenario, we're keeping, you know, in terms of what I have listed under the 50-50 rule, we're keeping our books that way. So if somebody from the government comes in and looks, they're going to see, all right, here's my 50-50 list. And yes, in fact, I spent what I said I was going to spend, et cetera, et cetera.
So real quick, John, follow up. Did you, though, just to get back to my initial question, give us an update as to what you're expending and when. So again, just to go back to the insurance, you said you spent 200,000. What was the total? Do you know what the total amount was? You may not know right now off the top of your head, but maybe you can get that to us, like how much you actually spent, or the town, not you personally, the town. I'm assuming it was a town. And then from there, when you do incur expenses, or once you have your budget finalized, I'm sure you said you plan on sharing it with us. So maybe let us know what you've spent up until you finalize the budget, and then the budget once it's completed. Is that fair?
Yeah, hang on one second. Just want to ask a quick question on what you were talking about. Will FEMA come out during the course of the project to make inspections? Because you don't want them, I'm assuming they're not going to come out at the very end of it. And if there's an issue, tell us at that point. So they'll be there periodically, I assume.
I have offered that to them. They've said basically, you don't expect us to be there every week or something like that. And I said, look, if you want to come out every week, you can. No, you're absolutely right. I'm not going through this project so that they can say you did something wrong at the very end. What I'm expecting is on a monthly basis, I'll be providing them with an update, photos, that sort of thing, and give them an update. And if they want to come out and look, or if they have other questions, and I'm expecting at least the monthly dialogue with them saying, here's where we are, this is what we're doing. But as that letter indicates, though, we made a number of design changes to how we're going to solve the problem. And that was subsequent to our public meeting. And that has all been explored with them, and they are all very comfortable with the way we're addressing the grade beam problem. So I'm assuming that we've developed a pretty good relationship, and I'm expecting that that's just going to continue throughout the construction.
All right, so I think Mr. Curley or Mr. Stark, who wants to go first? Mr. Stark, then back to Mr. Curley.
Just to clarify, Lloyd's is actually not an insurer, it's a marketplace of insurers. And so if your broker's had insurance price there, it's probably the best you're gonna do. And I was just wondering, do you know the total amount of coverage that you got?
Off the top of my head, I'd be guessing, but it's north of 12 million.
And have you gotten any preview of the insurability of the building once it's constructed? Are we fairly confident that it's insurable?
Well, it's insured before we'd started construction. And Kerma insures it today as we speak, and they're insuring it after the construction. This is only in the interim during construction.
Mr. Curley, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. So thank you, Jack, for asking those budget-related questions. I was thinking the same thing. I appreciate that you need to go through your process, evaluate the bids. I think I heard you say that you need a couple of weeks to do that. I'm guessing we don't want to rush it to get something. I think our next meeting is on the 19th, but we do have a meeting the first week in November. So I would love to have you come back with that detail. But before we get to that stage, I have some more kind of 30,000-foot questions related to the numbers. When you presented to us in March, you had talked about basically 3 categories of expenses, right? You had your fill remediation, which was round numbers 5 million. Building renovations, which was round numbers 3.5, and then the NOV foundation work, round numbers 3 million. 11.5, if you added it up in detail, it was 11.626. So I guess my question regarding the 50-50 rule, at the time you had mentioned that you were trying to confirm with FEMA that the first 2 categories would not be part of the 50-50 calculation, and it would be just the foundation work. You mentioned that they were in alignment with your hopes. Do you have that in writing? Because I did not see that in the letter.
I thought the letter covered that, but yes, yes.
What the letter talked about was, your office confirmed no new improvements will be made to the structure. They certainly made reference to making sure that we were under the substantial improvement threshold, but it didn't make any mention to the three categories and limiting the calculation to the foundation work as the numerator.
Well, maybe it's, maybe because I understand it so well, it's all clear to me. So, I'll be happy to send an email explaining exactly what I've had conversations on. I don't have the letter in front of me, but all I can say is that they have agreed, it's my understanding that they've agreed that exactly what we were hoping to get is what they've agreed to, which is that the construction material, the solution to the grade beam problem is very limited to the concrete work. In effect, we're replacing it with piles and that sort of thing. So they're very much on board with what we were hoping. So, but I'll have to send a follow-up email or something. I'll go through it and explain it more clearly.
Okay. And that's fine. I appreciate it. I just know that, we just want to try and avoid a problem down the future. I'm sure you more than anybody, right? In terms of the 50/50 calculation, do we have a firm number for the denominator for the FMV?
The overall value of the building as we speak is 7.2 million, 7.18, I believe, 7.2. So the 50/50 is 3.6. And right now, the numbers I'm guessing, and I'll have more specifics, as I said, after we do the budgets, but I'm really trying to stay under 3 million. Figuring at 3.6, that gives me more than enough in case something happens. This is all, again, pre-construction. Things change as you know better than I, or as well as I. So I want to try to stay as close as I can, as low as I can below 3 million.
Is there any concern that some of the expenses that the project may incur, whether it's the bids come in high, whether it's just overruns or otherwise, that how the expenses are categorized could be manipulated? Like, for example, like the insurance. Is the insurance falling into the foundation category? So regardless of the cost of the insurance, that's not changing the 50/50?
That's correct.
Okay. And
I've been very limited with the 50/50 rule of FEMA. There's only a certain small number of things that are being included in that for obvious reasons, because I want to keep the number as low as I can, and they've agreed to that. So, if the decking costs triple what we thought it was going to cost, doesn't matter because it's not part of the 50/50 rule. But again, as I've said in the past, there's only two numbers I worry about. It's the overall budget and the 50/50. The 50/50 rule budget, the 50/50 number, I'm not worried about now because they've agreed to what I was hoping they would agree to. So now the focus becomes, all right, what's the overall budget and that sort of thing.
so I do want to be on the record with expressing my concern here, because in this letter from FEMA, it talks about your office confirmed no new improvements will be made to the structure. And if they are, you'll communicate with FEMA in advance to ensure we're in compliance with the 50/50 rule. And we talked about whether it's changing things in the interior or otherwise. It would strike me that it's odd that we could have a large overrun or just make wide sweeping upgrades to the decking or otherwise and not worry about it hitting the 50/50 rule, while we would worry about whether the wall covering would send us over.
Well, since I have to remove the deck and I have to replace the deck, that's not part of the 50/50. So obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, if I replace the deck with gold, maybe that would be a problem. But, the decking, that's a great example. The decking is not part of the 50/50 rule. And why is that? Because but for the fact I was taking this gravel, this contaminated material, I wouldn't be touching the decking. So I have to rip the decking out so I can get to the remediated material. So that's not part of any enhancement to the building, and they agree. Their attitude was, you're absolutely right. So,
And I'm very glad to hear that. I just think it's important that we hear that in writing or see it in writing. So, okay. And then, for some of the expenses that are hard to put into one of those buckets, whether it's fill remediation, building renovations, the NOV foundations, you talked about the insurance not going into that bucket, fine. But even something like excavating, that excavation would have to happen whether we were doing the foundation work or not, whether we were doing the fill remediation or not. Those aren't mutually exclusive. So I'm just curious about expenses that would be incurred by the town that may fall into either bucket. And are you allocating them 50-50, or is there some idea?
I guess the best way to answer that is the 50-50 rule is a construct that's provided by FEMA. And once I have a definition from them of what is and what's not in, we are not in terms of moving forward with the construction. We're not sitting here. When I say we, the construction army that's out there, we're not budgeting. We don't care about where the money falls. We don't have all these different buckets. We only have two buckets. One's the overall budget and one's 50-50. Once I have the definition of the 50-50, if something else is costing money, and if it's not in that definition, it's not in that definition. So the conversation of, well, shouldn't a percentage of the decking go into the 50-50 rule? That conversation has already occurred between the town and FEMA, and that's already been decided. So I'm not having that conversation here.
All right. And last question, you talked about the changes in design plan. Were those changes to save money? Were those changes to improve the plan? What's the origin of those changes? And can you give us some color?
And again, I don't mean to get too much in the weeds. How can I put this? So the idea was, when we first started this project, is we were taking the grade beams. We were gonna, I don't know if any of this remember, how much you know or remember, I live with this too much. So we were gonna cut out the grade beams and just lower them a couple feet and rebuild all the grade beams. What we realized is, or what the engineers realized, was that's not gonna work. And the reason it's not gonna work is, when you lower the grade beams, the pilings that the grade beams are attaching effectively get shorter because you're lowering the grade beams on. And when you lower the grade beams even a few feet, in the event of a storm, the grade beams will survive, but they'll snap on the timber piles. So when faced with that, well, we could run around and go, oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Which there were a few people doing that. But the short answer is, okay, what's the solution? And so we scurried around and they came up with a different solution. And the different solution is going to be that we're going to remove all those grade beams like we originally planned. And we're going to be bringing in a lot more piles, a lot more helical piles, and we're not going to rebuild the grade beams at all.
No cross supports, it's just more pilings.
A lot more piling.
Wow.
And on top of those pilings, we have to put what's called pile caps, and those pile caps will be the actual structure. And so that's how we're going to do it. And that's why it was even more important in my mind to get it in writing from FEMA that we agree with your new design. And they talked about S2 or one of the architectural drawings. They say we're not going to approve 37 pages, but the S2 page that they were talking about, that is the new design. And I had gone over all this with them orally, and they were very comfortable with it. So that's why I asked for that in writing. So that's really one of the major changes. I mean, there's some minor ones, but that's the major change that we're going forward. And so that raises the question in my mind, at least, well, is this going to save us a lot of money? What is this going to do? Or is this going to change the cost? And And once I have a better sense of the bids, I can answer that question. My gut is it's going to be a wash. That we're going to save a little bit of time and money by not having to reform and build all the new grade beams. But I'm spending a lot of money on a bunch more piles and all that stuff. So, but I'm guessing. I got to really sit with the bids.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have a real.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm really pleased with the insurance outcome. But it sounds like you're dealing with brokers with some sophistication. And have we ever in any project reinsured part of the insurance of the project? Like here, they probably took that 12 million, they put it in front of the marketplace at Lloyd's, and they whacked it into loss layers, right? If we took a loss layer, we could conceivably save money on the premium. I mean, for 200 grand, it's probably not worth it. But Jared, maybe it might be more for you. Is that something we've ever done? Not like self-insured, but like self-reinsured?
Not that I'm aware of recently on a project, any projects like this.
Just something to keep in mind, maybe. Yeah.
So can you just briefly, and thank you for the presentation, and this may be an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How are we with respect to the original schedule? If I recall, the building was going to be off limits next summer, right? But the idea was to get it ready. It was going to be everything done by like a year from now. Wasn't that the original plan?
Yeah.
Are we still on track still to do that?
Yeah, I think we were a little, as I've said many times, we wanted to start right after Labor Day. We're a little bit behind. I'm pushing as hard as I can to do it as quick as I can. We've said all along it's going to take 12 to 15 months. Do I think it's going to take 12 to 15 months? Yeah. And as I said earlier, I think even though we are putting in a lot more piles, I think we might save a little time in terms of the grade beam, not having to build new grade beams, but I think 12 to 15 months is fair. And so, again, we're going to lose one summer. There's no way I can get that summer back, but 12 to 15 months.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you for the presentation, but you don't get to leave yet because
I've got another one.
we're on item number 6, to hear an update on the flood study status. Again, this is going to be presented by Mr. Bremer and Mr. Schmidt, so turn it back over to you.
Okay, the flood study status is pretty straightforward. I don't know, a little bit, maybe 2 months ago, we put out a scope for race to consider. They came in with a proposal. We met with members from the Fairfield Erosion Control Board, as well as race. We sat down, discussed a new scope. That proposal to go forward with that scope has already been received. We've already approved it, and they're working on it. Race is expecting to be completed in December, January timeframe. And I just wanted to take an opportunity just to make sure we all understand what we hope to accomplish with this, because I'm not sure if everybody has the same view as I have, or same understanding. What we're hoping to accomplish in December, January is have RACE come back after this resiliency study and provide us with some ideas on how they think we can do some flood mitigation strategies. 2 or 3 is what I'm hoping. These are going to be broad concepts, that sort of thing. I'm going to then take my plan is to then take those to the regulatory agencies, both DEEP and FEMA, to see if any of those concepts, and purely concepts, are permittable. Because in my mind, if they're not permittable, we're just wasting our time. If they are permittable, then it's something that we should explore further. So that's the plan. So I'm expecting shortly after we received the ideas from RACE to go before the regulatory agencies and find out what's permittable and what's not permittable. If any of them are permittable, that's when I think we should come back and start talking about, okay, what's the next steps and money and all that kind of stuff. At least that's the way I'm approaching it and the way I'm looking at things.
Okay, any questions? Ms. Marmion?
Can you just explain, we have ARPA funds, correct? That's funding these surveys, or can you clarify how we're paying for this?
Well, what we've been talking about now is the Penfield Resiliency Study. That was an additional $100,000 that this board gave the town to go do those studies. Off the top of my head, I think the cost that we were given by RACE to do a full study is about $87,000. So that's where we are on the 100,000. So as I said earlier, we're going to get phase one of this study done, and then we'll move on to other phases, assuming they're permittable and that sort of thing.
But did we have ARPA funding for mitigation?
We have ARPA funding for some other resiliency and flood mitigation strategies. We have $400,000 for a wave study that is currently being drafted as an RFP. We have some other, I believe it's ARPA money on another resiliency study on the very east end of the beach. So there's a number of different projects that we're looking at. But what we're talking about tonight is just this $100,000 for Penfield.
Yeah, just to clarify, the $100,000 that we approved was, it relates to the concern by the neighborhood that if we have to make these adjustments to Penfield, was that going to cause flooding issues? And so we approved the $100,000 to take a study for that particular area to see what, if anything, can be done.
That's exactly my understanding.
And when you say, just tell everyone what RACE is again. What is it?
RACE Engineering is a company that we've used many times in the past. They are the local, if you will, local experts on beach erosion, scouring. In fact, we use them to come up with a wave analysis and scour analysis for the new building. Basically what you do is you have to model what's going to happen when we lower the elevation 8 feet and a storm comes in, what kind of forces is the building going to be subjected to, so that when we talk about, are we lowering the grade beams or adding pilings, whatever, we need a technical analysis to say, okay, we have to build X to withstand all these forces. What are the forces? These are the guys that generate all that data and come in and say, okay, you have to build it so thick and so wide and that sort of thing.
All right, thank you. Questions, Mr. Curley?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, John. So again, thank you. Appreciate the update. But I'm a little confused about the timing that you mentioned, because I think I heard you say you went out to, or were in contact with RACE to consider scope about 2 months ago. But this 100,000 was approved back in, I think it was at our March 13th meeting. My expectation, or maybe I misunderstood, but I thought the 100,000 was, the study was going to be conducted relatively quickly and complete before construction started on Penfield. So I was a little surprised that you didn't even go out to RACE to consider the scope until 2 months ago, and that it would not be complete now until December, January timeframe.
Well, I can get you the exact date. Maybe I misspoke. It was probably earlier than 2 months ago. I'll be happy to get you the time frame. It was earlier than that. But I don't think, as I said earlier, I think it's not, we first had to come up with a scope. Then I guess the best way to put it is, we're not really sure exactly. I guess at the time that we first started this, we're not really sure where this resiliency was going to go and what we really should do. Because back in 2015, I understand there were a whole host of different ideas that Race had come up with as part of resiliency, which had nothing to do with what we were now doing with Penfield. And so that all has to be updated and all that kind of stuff. So we always had some ideas, but we never really knew if what they were doing was now timely in light of the new design or something that could be pursued. I guess overlapping all this are my conversations with DEEP and FEMA, which are kind of going exactly opposite to what the what we have been led to believe in the past, which is in the past when they built Penfield, they brought in a bunch more fill. They wanted to raise the building. They wanted to provide basically earthworks to prevent the water from coming in. And all that is exactly opposite to what FEMA and DEEP want. So, you know, we're kind of trying to thread that needle, if you will, try to come up with some ideas that are permittable. That's what I'm mostly concerned about, is when we're all said and done, what's going to be permittable as opposed to what would we like to do.
But I appreciate that, but I have to believe that had the study been started sooner, it could have been completed by now, and that information would be valuable to the Penfield project.
No, I don't think it would be at all. Because all the ideas about resiliency, we're not going to change what we're building on Penfield. That's not going to affect what we're doing at Penfield. What it's going to affect is Penfield's going to be built the way we designed it. And it's not, oh, if Race comes in and says we should do this or that. No, that's not what they're doing. This is all subsequent to that. They're going to be modeling everything as if Penfield's done. And now what do? So do we need to build other walls, other things?
No, I think that's exactly right. That's consistent with my expectation. I think that's consistent with the neighbors' expectation as well. I'm not saying that we're going to change things with Penfield. That horse is out of the barn, and we need to take steps to alleviate this notice of violation and be in compliance with FEMA and DEEP. I totally get that. I think the neighbors do too. But if we assume that the town moves forward with the plan for Penfield as planned, my expectation was that this study was going to help the town understand what the implications of that might be on the neighborhood. And yes, I understand and recall the discussions about, it's not about blocking the water from coming in, it's about allowing it to come in and go out again. But right now, we don't know what's going to happen. And I think if this study had been conducted when the money was approved in the spring, it could have been completed by now, and we could, the neighbors could have a pretty good idea of what to expect when a storm happens.
Okay.
Is the erosion control board engaged in this flood study process? Are they part of the group that's working on this? Are they in contact with the town and working with the town and working with Race?
As I said, we met with them and Race, and we discussed a new scope for the actual review. And that new scope is what Race is working on right now. So I'm assuming that when Race is done with its study, we will meet again with the Fairfield Erosion Control Board. We'll go over the results. So what are the next steps and that sort of thing. So yes, they have been involved.
So all parties are in agreement on the scope at this point, and the study is underway?
I believe that's so.
Okay, thank you.
Does the erosion control board, do they have to approve any type of a plan?
No.
They don't. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So my recollection, Mr. Curley, was that this was a post-construction effort. And it was, in fact, I was kind of surprised that we were executing this early. So I thought we were, we've got a plan that was going to be modeled, right? But that this was not a pre-construction plan, that it was a post-construction plan. That was my recollection. And it wasn't so much, you know, that we could tell them today, hey, guess what? When this is all done, the water's gonna go over here and not over here, and everybody's gonna be happy. It was maybe that level of detail after construction. So, you know, I don't know if I'm recollecting incorrectly or not, but that was my recollection of the timing of the whole thing. And I grant you, I thought it was earlier than March. I thought it was before budget season, but I could be wrong. But like just my 2 cents. I thought it was more the post than the pre.
Well, I would add that, I looked this just up yesterday. The meeting that was held here publicly by FEMA representatives was the last week of February. So we came to all the boards. I don't think it was approved in March. But maybe it was.
I thought it was March 13th.
Well, that's fine. So from the Board of Finance or the RTM?
Board of Finance, I believe.
All right, so the RTM was after that, right, so.
I just have a question. Was the Flood and Erosion Board involved in terms of the decision to get rid of the grade beans and to put in the piles, or so that in terms of understanding how the water flows in and out, is this affected? Do we know if it's affected, or?
It shouldn't be affected. No, it shouldn't be affected. I mean, the water's gonna flow into the building. That's the way it's designed. That's what everybody wants from FEMA. That's what's gonna happen. If we were hoping that with grade beams there, it would somehow block some of the water, that's not what they were designed to do. That's not what FEMA wants, and that's not what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. I had one other question. I don't know if somebody else needed to go. The timing on the insurance, just to go back, when did we receive word that we were going to be insured?
I don't have a specific date. It was weeks ago,
So it was September,
early September, probably.
early September. Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions? I see Mr. Walsh. You there? How are you? I didn't recognize when you joined us. I apologize. Your mic's off. Still off. Can't hear you, Jim, unfortunately. Any other questions on this? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Bremer, for coming by. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. It's item number 7, to hear an update on the DPW paving plan. I believe this update is going to come from Mr. Schmidt. Hey, Jim, I still can't hear you. I apologize. I don't know what's going on.
All right. So Prue just handed out the backup for this. We were working till the end of the day today to get this into a digestible form for everybody to look at. Jim Walsh, I emailed this to you just a minute or two ago, so you have it to follow along as well. We're doing well. The paving plan is, we're moving along well. And I would say the best indicator of that, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, and just for a little bit of background, so some of the terminology and names haven't been forgotten, or to refresh your memories, you see the name Beta. That was the consultant that we hired to do the study, the paving study, and analyze all the roads and determine which ones were high priority. And we put those into a year by year plan, for taking care of those and, repaving. And so in the bottom right-hand corner, you see that the beta, so the right half of this document, the beta plan miles per the report from January 28th, was 33.41. The actual miles, which is what we've done so far, through the funding that we have, it was 34.57. So that's a great indication of, what we've been able to accomplish. And a little bit of this is projecting to the end of this fiscal year. But that's where we think we're going to stand at the end of the fiscal year. So the report is broken up really into two parts and two measures that we're looking at. On the left-hand side, you have the dollars that were in the plan and the dollars that were spent. And the right-hand half of the report is in terms of the product that comes out of this. And the basis is the miles of road that have been paved, repaved. And so the first column is shows what was in the plan, the estimated amount that would be required by the plan in each given year. The second column is the amount that we've spent or encumbered. Third column in the right half of it is the amount in miles of paving that's been done. Next column is the amount of miles that have been done that are related to the beta plan. And then the last column is essentially the total miles of paving that have been done, which would include any paving related to the beta plan. So we're happy with where we are. I think over the next week, and I mentioned this at a recent meeting, that we would probably be looking for additional funding to keep pace. And so part of our proposal for the FY23 surplus will be for some additional funding to fund the spring requirement, the work that'll be done in the springtime next year, to fund and keep pace with what the plan is. We have the $2 million in the current year that was in the operating budget, so that'll get us through the fall. And then we'll require some additional amount in the springtime. And as I said, we'll get back to you with the exact amount that we'd be looking for and propose that as part of the use of the surplus, the FY23 surplus.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Schmidt, questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just have a real quick, just clarifying question. Thank you for that summary, Mr. Smith. I'm not following the distinction between not the dollar side, but the miles side of the report. So right-hand side, the first and second columns there, the beta paving plan. Help me understand the distinction between those two columns.
Sure. So we're following the plan. We're following the plan as it was set forth by beta. What happens along the way, and I distinctly remember John Marsilio talking about this at the time when this was first being proposed. And I'm amazed that we're in year 3 and we're starting year 3 of this program. But what happens along the way is that there are sometimes conflicts or things that will be required outside of what was laid out in the plan. So for instance, if the gas company comes and they say that we have to lay gas lines in a road, then that's going to require us to devote some of these resources to those projects. There may be other instances in a case where there may have been a road that was scheduled to be done, but in the future, there was going to be some contiguous sidewalk work that was gonna be done. So we're not gonna do the paving of that road, at the exact time that the plan recommends it. We're gonna time it up with the contiguous work that's being done on the sidewalk. So things like that will, require us to, go off in another direction and use some of the resources that we have. And in this case, it could have been the $2 million a year in operating money. It could have been some of the ARPA money, and there was some original $1 million in capital funding in the very beginning of this program. So effectively, what you have, to answer your question more directly, that left side, that first column, related to the mileage, is the beta plan. The next one is the roads that we did related to the beta plan. And then the last one is total amount of roads, which would include those things that could have been something that would have been a gas line or something like that.
So just to, I'm going to echo, bounce this back at you so that I can make sure I heard you correctly. So the first column there, the 11.38, 12.13, 5.22, and so on, that's per the plan, full stop. The middle column here is effectively kind of the adjusted plan for the reasons that you cited, and then the third column is the actual miles paved, regardless of how it compares to the plan. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
So if I look at 2023, for example, the original plan was 12 miles and change. The adjusted plan related to that is only 7. So I assume that you skipped over some roads for one reason or another, but that's not to say that you only did 7, because DPW is showing that they did almost 11.4.
Right.
So you did the DPW did other roads off the plan so that they were still keeping up with the overall paving goals, so to speak.
Exactly. Staying up with the plan as best as we can, but dealing with things as they come at us from utilities or whatever the case may be.
Thank you. That's a good clarification. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Mr. DeWitt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So, thank you for the data, first off. So year 22 seemed like this was a banner year, right? They said we're gonna need 4.2, we only spent 4, and we paved 2 extra miles for less money, so good on us. But 2023, we went over budget 400,000, and we did 1 mile less. So I guess my first question is, you know, what's driving this, right? So, because in the first year, in theory, if there were time, right, we could have spent another $200,000 and paved 15 miles. I'm making this up, right? But we didn't spend the full allocation amount, right? So was the actual miles, so, okay, so I guess let me ask it this way. It's not driven by the budget because we underspent the budget, right? So is that 13 miles like the total time in the year and the total available roads that we had to do that? Was that like the maximum amount? And we were just fortunate enough to come on 250,000 under?
I'll try it this way.
Okay.
We are constrained by this budget in a certain extent because we have the $2 million in the operating budget. And that year, that's all we can spend out of the operating budget for paving. That's what we have. The ARPA money, and there was, like I said, there was $1 million to begin with from that we borrowed back in 21 or beginning of
21.
22.
Yeah.
Right. So there was that amount that's flexible too. That's going to roll from one year to the next. But in terms of the there is a certain amount that we don't, that money has to be spent in that year, unless, obviously, if there's money left over, we can reappropriate it the following year. And there was a small amount of that did happen. But the things that drive it, I know there were a couple of things in this instance that and I believe these took place in 23, where there was, number one, there was an increase in price. So the prices kind of started lower and they increased as time went on. So the unit cost obviously increased with that. In the beginning, there was also more reclamation work, which was, a total taking out the road, crumbling it up, and things that I'm not totally familiar with, and can't totally explain. But it's a complete rehaul of the road versus where we are now, which is just milling and paving the roads, and that's where we are now. So the cost of reclaiming the road could be 2.5 times what it would normally cost.
No, that answered my, so what I had forgotten was, I think when we told Beta to do the study, it was kind of unconstrained by budget. So they're like, the sweet spot's 4.2. And we said, oh, no, we only have $4 million budget. So, okay, so that answers that question. So that's great. I mean, overall, listen, having sat here for many years, hearing how much we're gonna allocate, this is, I don't want you guys to take my questions as anything other than this is amazingly accurate compared to what we've heard for the last 10 years, right? I mean, before this, it was, I think 3 million is the right number, and then we'd spend 5 and we would get half the miles, right? So this for me really solidifies the fact this was money well spent with Beta. I won't be on the board, but you guys should endorse, who's ever left, should endorse the next one, right? Because I think that whatever money I know it wasn't that big an amount, right? But this is far and above and more accurate than we've ever seen for a 10-year period. So, yeah, I think this is great. I think they did a good job, and I think Bucky had a lot to do with bringing them in. So, congratulations to him as well. And thank you for the update.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stark.
If a resident wants to know when their street's going to be paved, is there somewhere they could look?
I believe there is, and I think the First Select Woman's been putting it into her newsletter, a link to whatever the upcoming projects, whatever the upcoming roads are. You're welcome.
I just have are we spending any of the paving money to reduce sidewalks, or is that totally separate?
Right, so one of the things that makes this whole analysis a little bit difficult is, and it hasn't been too extensive to this point, but was that there are sidewalks that need to meet ADA regulations. And so to the extent that we're paving a road at an intersection where there are sidewalks, then those sidewalks are taken care of in terms of getting them into compliance with ADA.
Okay, that's fine, but it would be the paving money that's doing that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. I get it.
Right. I'll say, as we go through the capital plan, you'll see that we are putting more money and proposing additional funding for sidewalks specifically. There is a sidewalk study that has been done similar to the paving study, and prioritizing which sidewalks need to be done. So as part of the capital plan that you guys will hear next month, you'll get a taste of that too, and what what our plan is for improving the sidewalks, a lot of them which have been neglected for many, many, many years.
Isn't it the exact opposite of what you just said, Mr. Mottola? The paving plan's not paying for the sidewalks or the ADA compliance, right? It's totally separate. That's correct?
No. This paving.
Whoever's saying agreeing with me, you're saying no.
This paving plan is covering parts of the, again, not a lot, hasn't been extensive, but those parts of the sidewalk related to the sidewalks that are near where the paving is being done.
So when you pave a road that's near an intersection and there's a sidewalk intersects with it, you You may at times, once you pave the road, have to fix the sidewalk to comply with the ADA because while they're there. So that's what you're saying, right, Jared?
Correct, yeah, yeah.
But you're saying we're gonna be getting a separate plan on sidewalks in the next few weeks.
Right, aside from this work that's done just because it happens to be aligned with the paving, another study was done that identified which sidewalks were really in need of repair. And so that's what the additional funding that we have put into the capital plan, that's what that's gonna address.
Okay. Yeah, anything else, Mr. DeWitt? Mr. Curley?
Yeah, thank you. So sticking with the sidewalk point, and appreciate that if there's a new plan coming, I'm looking forward to seeing it and what that overall thought process might be. Personally, I have to say, like, I was surprised at some of the sidewalk work that the town has engaged in, because as I drive from one end of town to downtown on a daily basis to work or to or from, I'm seeing roads that have sections of concrete sidewalks, and now new blacktop sidewalks are going in, followed by another section of concrete, and it's kind of patchwork along the way. And I seem to recall that at some point, someone from DPW or engineering, I can't recall which, had actually met with the folks on the RTM and spoke about the cost per foot or whatever the unit is for concrete versus blacktop, and the lifespan of concrete versus blacktop sidewalks. And it would seem to me like the town's spending good money after bad to put blacktop sidewalks out there, and combine that together with the inconsistency of going from one material and switching back and forth as you drive down the road. Who makes the decision in terms of whether that sidewalk is going to be blacktop or concrete? How much discussion or thought goes into that?
Though, where you see those inconsistencies, I don't know what who made those decisions in the past to determine which ones were blacktop, asphalt, which ones were concrete. I don't know. You know, we'd have to go back in time and look at who, why and who made those decisions. I can tell you that the report that was done identifies them specifically and breaks them out to say, these are the portions of sidewalk that are concrete. These are the ones that are pavement. Here's the typical cost to redo a sidewalk that's concrete, to redo one that's paved. And going forward, we'll take that under consideration. It's always something to consider, whether it's taking into account the lower cost with the lower lifespan of it, or the higher cost and the lengthier lifespan of the material. So that's something that we'll consider in the future. I can only speak to what was laid out in the report, and that it did differentiate between those, and it would be significantly more expensive if we were to go throughout the town and do the entire town with concrete. That would cost a lot more money.
Yeah, no doubt. But I just find it odd that we would mix materials, as you drive down Mill Plain Road or some of the other longer streets where you get to see those stretches. It is a patchwork of concrete than blacktop. And it just, in the last couple of weeks, I watched them pouring blacktop I don't mean this in a negative knock to the town, because I think this particular stretch, there was no sidewalk. So to be ADA compliant, a sidewalk is better than no sidewalk. But I would think that if a street has some section of sidewalk that's concrete, that we just, as part of a plan, would consider, it may take us longer to get through the whole town, but let's be consistent with our materials.
So if it's, and if Mill Plain's your example, fine, and I can go back and I can ask that question. If there's other specific examples, let me know, and we can, I can try to get an answer for you about that. As far as, with regard to things that have been done recently, anything that's been done years before that, I wouldn't know the answer to that.
Okay, any other questions on this topic? Seeing none, thank you for the update.
Sorry, John.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, one last question, just in terms of timing, because I know that the town has been busy at work. I see a lot of roads are milled and ready to go, and it's weather dependent. At what point does paving stop for the season? And I know it typically starts in, mid to late March or even early April, but again, weather dependent. But at what point do we stop for the fall?
I think it is weather dependent. My guess would be late October, generally speaking, but will be dependent on what happens with the weather. And if I could, I'd like to take one moment just to recognize Sabrina is on is remote. Sabrina is the formerly known as the DPW analyst, the financial analyst that I hired a few weeks ago, and she was instrumental in putting together this analysis, which, it's kind of like, you're watching a pro name the sport player, and, you see something like this, it looks easy. There was there was a lot of nuances to this that we had to go through. And Sabrina coming in cold, absorbing this stuff, analyzing it, working with John Cattell in DPW, helped put this together. And I think it was, like I said in the beginning, made it something that was digestible for you guys. So I just want to recognize her.
Thank you.
I think we should make her turn the camera on so we can see her. If she's not going to appear in front of us.
Thank you,
Thanks, Sabrina.
So Sabrina's the new hire.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Welcome to the town, Sabrina. Hopefully we'll meet you in person one of these days. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 8 to hear updates from Board of Finance committees. I think the first thing I want to hear from is from Mr. DeWitt on the purchasing policy. Where are we, and is it something we're actually going to vote on before you leave this board? That's the million-dollar question.
Yes. As my legacy project, yes, the thought is that this will be voted on in November, which will be my last meeting. This is the actual policy. Ms. Charlton and I bloodied it up pretty good and made all our comments and have a executable Word document. I have the final action. There's just a couple questions, nothing that's going to change anything of any real substance of Mr. Bremer. We chatted before, so I'll send it to him this week. I think the questions are, and again, they're clarifying question. It's not, why did you pick $10,000 and stuff like that. So we'll correspond by email. The plan is to get the answers to those questions, make any changes that we have to, and then I'll accept all the changes and then send this policy out to our board for review. It is, it looks voluminous, but I'll tell you, it's about 50 pages of policy, if you will. There's a bunch of examples, So we will certainly send that out in enough time for everyone who wants to go through in painful detail and read everything. But the plan is the November meeting. My committee will give an overview for everyone who just wants a Reader's Digest version of the document, and then recommend we move it forward.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Mr. Curley?
Thank you. And thanks for your efforts. I'm actually quite sad to think about the idea that our next meeting in November, our next regular meeting will be your last. You've been on this board for, I guess, too long, but But I've sat on that table and presented to you. I've had the good pleasure of sitting across the table from you in this format as well. And it's been a pleasure to work with you, Chris, in both capacities. And I appreciate, on behalf of the town, I appreciate all your efforts and really well-intentioned and really pointed, but appropriate questions and analysis throughout the years. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Curley. I know we've not always agreed on points, but I do appreciate the nice comments. Thank you.
I do have some questions though.
Oh, you do? Go ahead.
Please fire away.
So real quickly, I think you had mentioned at a previous meeting that because of this policy was really a pretty wholesale revamp, there's no red line available, but is it possible to get a, you said Reader's Digest version, but just a summary of the changes that have, how it compares to the previous policy and compare and contrast?
Yeah, we could certainly give you the existing policy. It'll take you 2 minutes to read. Because it's short, right? It is. I think it's 3 pages. And my intent was to give it just a quick PowerPoint presentation to say, here's what we started with, and here's kind of the goals of the committee and how we kind of worked through. A lot of this was driven by the audit that Mr. Centofanti did. Gosh, how many years ago now? 4 years? 4 years ago, right? That was kind of well, I've been talking about purchasing policy long before that, right? And the need to revamp it. But when Mr. Centofanti came through and said, wow, there's a lot of things that we can directly tie to other issues that need to go into new purchasing policy. So that you could call that the seed that we started with. But I was just hoping to, rather than having I'd love you guys to read it, don't get me wrong. But I mean, I was just going to put 3 or 4 slides just to say, these are the real meat and potatoes of what we kind of got to at the end.
And in anticipation of that, this policy being finalized, Mr. Schmidt, and really consistent with some of the other stuff that you've been working on, do you have a plan in place for implementing the change to the new policy in terms of training for the department heads and the folks that need to follow this policy? Do you have a timeline or plan for educating those department heads?
So when we get the plan, we'll take a look at it. I think the main thing is going to be, identifying those, the pieces of the plan that the department heads and others deal with on a day-to-day basis, and boiling it down to what, coming up with kind of cheat sheets of what they need to know, so that as they're working their way through the procurement process on a day-to-day basis, they understand what the limits are, what needs to go before boards, who needs to approve what, and those kinds of things. So to have some, shorthand documents that they'll be able to look at quickly.
We will be recommending that, because, you work in purchasing, you should really know every page of this. I'm not exaggerating. You work in DPW and you got to know, you need to know pages 5 through 8. You know what I mean? So I agree with Mr. Schmidt that the training should be, any department buying something should really be familiar with this particular section and, section 5, section 1A. But, again, if you're in purchasing, you're in, you should, this is kind of the Bible. It is, right? And, but again, if you're in DPW, there's some stuff in here that you really don't need to know, right? So I agree. And the timing, I don't think this is going to be a big training deal, especially if you can bust it out into smaller chunks.
Mr. Testado.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on something Mr. Curley kind of sort of alluded to, asked about the actual policy itself. So I guess a couple things. One, you may have told us about a policy meeting. I'm not sure. I don't know if you met with the administration, with Jared or whoever to discuss what whatever plans it is that you went into creating the policy, that's one. Two, I know you talked about getting us a summary, so I guess I don't want to use the word concern, but the night of the next meeting is when we're a policy, right, based on what you're saying. So is it going to be like a 50-page policy that night that we're going to have to like confirm or vote on, or will we get a preview? That's one. Two, again, just curious if there have been any policy meetings at all.
Well, there's been plenty of policy meetings, I can tell you that. So the document started with a document that the previous purchasing director had started with a team. And then he reviewed it, realized that central office really wasn't included in the right way, so we brought central office in. So this is years. I'm not exaggerating, right? So it's been an iterative process. Mr. Bremer's been intimately involved. The new purchasing director came in and just took the bull by the horns and said, okay, this is, he's gonna live by this. He's gonna live and die by this thing, right? So he went in and said, "Hey, I like this part. I like this part. I don't like this part." So he did it, really, really great job. So I want to, make sure that we give due there as well. Have they been noticed meetings on the committee? No, they haven't. It's been a subcommittee meeting, and it's hard enough getting two of us in a room to do this. And a lot of this was done, like I did the first review on this on a plane heading to Arizona. So it's a lot of outside process work. So, and I thought I went through this, so maybe I didn't, so I'll be clear. I'm going to get the comments back from Mr. Bremer. I'm going to accept every change in here, so this is a clean document, and I will send it out to the board with at least 2 weeks to review, right?
That's great, Chris. Thank you.
If you guys would like, you'd like to see the Reader's Digest version that 2 weeks before, I mean, I guess I could do that as well, but at the very least, that Reader's Digest version will be available the night of the meeting, so.
Great, thank you. I see Mr. Bremer coming to the table, which indicates he wants to say something. Go ahead.
May I ask a question?
You can ask a question.
So we have not seen this policy. We have not seen this policy in months. That's right. I've not seen your version.
Right,
So-
that's right.
And I know you're going to send, we talked very briefly before the meeting, you're going to send me whatever the questions are or the clarifications you need. But we'd like to have an opportunity to take a look at this too before the vote, so that we can at least weigh in if there's something in the new pod. I don't know what it is. So have you made substantial changes to what we gave you many months ago? If you have, we'd like an opportunity to take a look at that and at least go through it.
I wouldn't say substantial changes.
Okay, well, you know what the feeling is. If there are substantial changes, we want to have an opportunity to weigh in on those. If there aren't any substantial changes, then that's fine.
So, if I get off the stick and get you and send you the questions, I know you'll answer in a prompt manner, and then I'm happy to give it to you, give you guys a week. I'm trying to do math. So next, give you a week to look at it. See, I really don't want another iterative process here, right? I mean, this is kind of the final committee.
It's got to end at some point.
It's got to end at some point, right? So I was kind of thinking this was it. I can tell you, we haven't deleted 30 pages and I haven't added 30 pages, right? By any stretch of the imagination. There's some word changes in there that I think are contributing. There was some duplication in there that I thought that removing it made a lot of sense. So, but I'm happy to give you a week to look at it and get and offer one more real quick set of comments before I give our board the 2 weeks. Like I said, I'm trying to do math. It would have to be, quick, yeah.
Just give us an opportunity to review it. That's all I'm asking.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this? Okay.
Mr. Mottola, this is Jim Walsh. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jim. Go ahead.
Following up on what Tom just said, shouldn't the Board of Ed have to take another look at what the final product is and weigh in on it as well during the same period of time that the town's going to be looking at it?
I guess. I don't know why. It's a purchasing document. In theory,
Well,
let's be clear, in theory,
considering they purchased 2/3 of the stuff in this town, I guess shouldn't we? I mean, what I'm trying to prevent is them coming to our meeting the night we get it in November and torpedoing this thing, and then we all saying, "Yeah, let's give them some time to think about it, and let's hear it in December or January."
doesn't work with my timeline, but I mean, other than that, I guess this board could deprive me of my legacy. No, I mean, yeah, this is a Board of Finance document, right? In theory, even though I don't think in the collaborative spirit with which we've been working for the last couple of years on this, I don't want to just say to the town, listen, we're voting on it, you guys take it or leave it, right? I do think, listen, when we vote on this, I can guarantee you this thing ain't gonna be perfect. And I can guarantee you, and again, I would recommend to the board that in a year, you should bring the purchasing director forward and say, how's this thing working out? You know, we signed it and, well, you know, we've got some changes. Great, let's maybe reconvene a subcommittee and go through that again. So this will be an iterative process. If we want to keep pursuing perfection, you'll keep having nothing, right? So.
Yeah. Go ahead. Jim, you all set for now?
I guess, but I mean, I think if the town's going to look at it, then I think the Board of Ed should have a week to give their comments on it and supply them to the whole Board of Finance at some point.
So my just, and I'll get to you, Ms. Leclerc, in 2 seconds. My understanding is the Board of Ed has been part of this process the whole time, right?
Central office, yes.
Right. So maybe send it to them too when you send it to Mr. Bremer and see if they have any last call comments on it. Ms. Leclerc, go ahead.
That was exactly what I wanted to say.
Sorry, I stole your thunder. I apologize. But I think the idea is send it to Mr. Bremer and send it to the Board of Ed. The version you have here and.
Am I sending this to Courtney?
That's what I would suggest. Yep.
Okay.
All right.
But it's gonna have just to be clear, it's the same week the town gets to review it,
That's
right?
fine, yeah.
Right?
So
It's
you
gonna
vote-
have a day, and like, if I don't hear from you by this date, you know, silence is concurrence.
Right. He needs to review it, period.
Yep.
And then I think, Mr. Walsh, you're 100% correct about this, and so you're Mr. DeWitt. Let's vote on it, and in a year from now, take a look at it and see where we are with it. And if there's a problem, we can always make changes, right?
Changes to this are inevitable.
Right.
Absolutely.
You're gonna hear from me in a minute on the credit card that one of the recommendations from the town is take a look at the policy once a year. I think we should be looking at our policies all the time on an annual or semi-annual basis. So anyway, any other questions on this?
Yeah, John. Is the credit card policy going to be part of the purchasing policy?
The credit card policy is an independent policy outside of the purchasing policy.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Do we have any, I mean, we have a budget, but we already did that a while ago.
There's no status
There's
for
no
budget.
status
Yeah, there's
on
no, yeah, I think I gave my final.
You did. Yeah. Is there anything on fund balance, Mr. Curley, or nothing? Okay. And I have something on the audit committee. Ms. Leclerc and I and Ms. Charlton met on two meetings, September 11th and the 19th. And we primarily focused on the credit card issue that's been out there. And just a few highlights that I want to point out here. The first meeting that we had in September 11th, we focused on the investigation that was done by Ms. Simpson from Human Resources. We asked many questions about that. You know, a thought process, and Mary, I'm going to give you a chance to chime in a minute, is that, you know, we needed to understand what happened before we can consider how to fix a problem. So that's why we had the Mr. Schmidt was there, the first selectwoman was there in the first meeting, and Ms. Simpson. So we asked many questions about the investigation. I mean, I know the investigation said that there was no evidence of fraud, but I don't think you can conclusively say there wasn't any fraud. There was or wasn't any fraud, because a lot of the documentation that was looked at wasn't in good shape, and there weren't really adequate records to say one way or the other. I think the big theme that you get out of the credit card issue is we had, and the board will remember this, there was an internal audit done on this issue back in February of 2020, right, Mary? And by Ms. Saxel, that was made known to the administration at the time. And then at one of our Board of Finance meetings in 2021, Ms. Saxel gave us the presentation on her internal audit and some of the issues that she found with respect to the credit cards. And at that meeting, it was represented that the town was addressing these issues. And, you know, what we discovered is that 2 years later, we were still having some problems. And so I think a theme that comes out of all this is that we need to make sure the town and this board that if we have an internal audit presentation that's being given to us and there are recommendations being made, that we need to be able to follow up to make sure that those recommendations are being followed through. In this case, I don't think that happened. But the good news is, and I appreciate this from the town, is that Mr. Schmidt gave a presentation at our September 19th meeting on what is happening right now with respect to the policy, that they've reviewed it and they've implemented several recommendations. They met, right, Mr. Schmidt, with Joe Centofanti to get some guidance from him with respect to the issue. There is online at our meeting, Town of Fairfield credit card use and best practices document that you should feel free to look at. Some of the, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but some of the recommendations are review the policy on an annual basis. They've also, the town has reduced the amount of credit cards. I believe it was at 67 at one time, and now it's down to 38, and you're still doing some more review of what employees need a credit card, setting credit limits, policies in place to reconcile spending activity, providing mandatory training, conduct inventory on cards at least annually. So those are the things that the town has implemented to address this issue, excuse me. The one thing that we still need to look at is the town back in, what's the date? November of 2019, instituted a municipal fraud policy and procedures, Town of Fairfield Standards of Conduct, Municipal Fraud Policies and Procedures document. Excuse me, it's good. The one thing that I had a concern about, and we need to follow up with respect to this from the audit committee, is that it talks about if there's, what is fraud, municipal fraud policies and procedures, that if fraud is suspected, that there shall be an investigation. And It states that the Director of Human Resources, in conjunction with the town attorney, the first selectman, the chief of police, and if needed, the chief fiscal officer have primary responsibility for investigation of all activity as defined in this fraud policy. The question I have and the concern, and I kind of do this as an attorney in Bridgeport, and these conflict issues come out. If there's an allegation that fraud is being conducted by, let's say, the CFO, and I'm not saying this, just please bear with me, or a first select person, I think the policy is a little faulty with respect to how the town addresses something like that. So I think we need to take a look at this policy and try to put some mechanisms in place if that is a situation that arises, because it would be very hard for a CFO to investigate, be part of the investigating team to investigate a claim that a first select person is committing some type of financial fraud. It's just inherently a conflict. It's very hard to investigate your boss or your supervisor. So
John, have you
That's
worked
right.
with the town attorney to?
that would be part of it. Yes, we have to.
Thank you.
So what we need to do is the audit committee needs to bring Ms. Simpson back in. We didn't get to this. We dealt with other issues. Talk to her, maybe the town attorney, obviously, and try to put some processes in place that address a situation like that if it ever was to arise. So that's pretty much what happened in the summary. Mary, do you want to add anything to this?
I think you covered it pretty well. The only thing based on what Jim Walsh was asking, with the purchasing policy, that's going to guide how a normal purchase through a purchase order or a bid would happen. The credit cards is another method of paying, and so is like an employee expense report. But they all should follow the same policies on what you can spend money and how to document and how to those should be pretty standard. It doesn't matter how you pay for it.
That's correct. So that's my report. Any questions, Ms. Merriman?
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned that, I guess my concern is that if Ms. Saxel does an audit, and in this case with the credit card audit, it was represented to this board that these, the findings were going to be looked at and then policy was going to be implemented, and it didn't happen per se. So I guess, what is the audit committee's recommendation in terms of other audits that Ms. Saxel has done so that we can be assured that these, the recommendations were followed through on?
So I think back in 2020, it was presented that the recommendations were put in place, but the staff changed. All the department heads are new. And so somehow it got lost in the process, and with COVID, a lot of things didn't happen the way they had been happening. So I think it was just that it just didn't carry through all the way. It was too new at the time, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think that, well, in 2021, it was brought to our attention again, too, the audit, and so we still had the issues. I think the important thing is, now, we as a board, we're getting these internal audits presentations, I think twice a year. So we should do a follow-up to, make sure that whatever's been recommended has been implemented. Obviously, CFO needs to make sure those things are happening too. I mean, there's only so much our board can do. It's the day-to-day operations of the town that needs to address some of these things, where we can oversee it from, 100 miles up a little bit, twice, 3 times a year, to make sure that whatever internal audit recommendation has been recommended, that in fact is happening. So that's, go ahead, Mr. Schmidt. hear from you on this. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I just like to, I appreciate you raising that issue because that's exactly the case, is that these are their recommendations, and Ms. Saxel would, I think, would acknowledge that what she puts forth are recommendations for the administration. We then take those, we, look at them, analyze them, see if are they going to require additional resources, additional time, additional money, and determine which ones, which ones to put into place. They're not requirements, and, there's no place for the board to come in and say, you're not doing this and you need to, or else. These are recommendations to the administration to evaluate and put into place.
That's true, but, and I don't disagree with your statement, but we better make sure as a town that if something is recommended that would fix an issue or a problem, and it's not a costly recommendation, or maybe even it is a little costly, that they should be implemented. And, but I agree, you do have some authority over this. We want to make sure that if there's an issue or a problem and there's a recommendation to fix an issue or a problem, that is addressed, and maybe it's through another mechanism through your office that addresses the problem. But the point is, recommendations should not be ignored. I guess that's the issue. So, Mr. Testani, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, real quick, Jared. So based on what you've said and what we've talked about here, what Mr. Mottola was talking about, so there've been policies, fair to say, that have been implemented, right? Based on some of the recommendations within town hall. In fact, some were brought to light by, I think it was an ethics member, not by the Board of Finance, I don't think. Initially on the credit card thing, I think it was, right? An ethics board member. But whatever.
So the initial contact was made by a resident.
But to get to Mr. Mottola's
That
point,
kind
I
of
think,
started the investigation.
I want to agree with what he's saying. I think we have to realize that a lot of the policies that we're talking have been implemented by the town, and that there's going to be more policies moving forward to correct any inaccuracies. Is that fair to say?
On the credit card issue,
And whatever Ms. Saxel thinks may need to be.
yeah, as the chairman pointed out, I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago to the subcommittee, and kind of in the framework of what the best practices are for credit card purchases, and addressed each one of those one by one to say what we've always done in some cases, what we're doing now, what we've done newly, and where we plan to go in the future on some of these that may take some time to implement. But yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying that we take the recommendations and we don't look at them. I said what I said before, which is we look at each recommendation, evaluate it, and based on what benefit and what additional control we think it can yield and what the cost is, we'll implement them as we see fit.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. No, I just want to say I agree with the point you were trying to make.
Thank you, Jack. And I don't disagree with what Mr. Schmidt's saying either. So, Mr. Walsh, go ahead. I see your hands up.
It would, I hear what Jared says, and I'm not saying I disagree with it at all either. However, there should be a formal response that's in writing, signed by the fiscal officer and the first select woman about why they did not move forward with the audit recommendation. And if it's for cost, that should be costed out. This way, it's just out there. We all know what the reason is. And if we want to challenge it, we'll bring you in for a meeting. But there should be a formal response, not something behind the scenes. We're just not going to follow it. It's just too difficult. It should be something formalized. Put on the town website right next to the audit report. This way it's just out there. Don't you agree, Jared?
I totally understand what you're saying, and I think that would happen organically with the process as we do it, and that all of the audits come before the audit subcommittee, and that we would respond to them. We would respond to each one of their recommendations and say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're not doing, and that you guys are free to ask us questions. Why aren't you doing that? And we'll have a response to them.
Okay. I'm not on the audit subcommittee. I'm just one of 9 members on this committee. And I get each of the audits that comes in. I would like a written response that comes to the entire Board of Finance, not just the audit subcommittee, of why you're not going to entertain or put into practice what the internal auditor said. And we could talk about it in another meeting when Ms. Charlton's here as well. But that's personally what I would like to see happen.
I think that's a good point, Mr. Walsh, and we should talk about it as a board when we're all present.
Yep.
Thank you. Anything else,
Okay.
Mr. Walsh?
No, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for allowing me the time.
Okay. Mr. Curley, you have something?
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with you, Mr. Walsh. I think the more formal we can make this process, especially as it relates to internal audits and processes and controls, I agree that any administration should have the ability to take into consideration the audit recommendations and choose to accept them or not. But if not, I think it should come back to this board and we should have a written response and an understanding as to why that decision was made, whether it was cost related, resource related, or just there's a better way to do things, right? We all talk about striving for best practices and we have an internal auditor that may make a recommendation that may not be the best practice, and you may have a different view. And I think that administration should have that right. So I support that, but I do think that needs to be more open and transparent. I think the issue that stood out to me that we were talking about before is that when the internal auditor, Ms. Axel, came back to this board, my notes are unclear as to whether it was 2020 or 2021 with respect to the audit. The representation that was made was that her recommendations were adopted. And then only after the fact, we learned that they were not in fact adopted. So I think to add on to the process, as part of that follow-up to any internal audit, if there is an implementation of change or a process improvement, that part of the internal audit process would be within a certain number of months, 6, 12, 15, we can discuss and pick, but have a circle back and give that internal auditor a chance to revisit, based on their calendar and looking at what previous audits occurred, were these recommendations that were agreed to actually implemented. And I think that would really close the loop on the whole process. I think for me, when I looked at the credit card investigation, I didn't appreciate until the audit meeting that I attended and listened to Ms. Simpson talk about the distinction about how it was not an audit, it was an investigation. And as an HR matter, it was specifically focused on fraud and not necessarily processes and controls. But clearly, there were lots of things that came out of this investigation that made it clear that the processes and controls were lacking. And I appreciated, Mr. Schmidt, that you came to the audit committee with recommendations of best practices and things that could change and processes and controls that could be put in place. I thought that was a really positive step in terms of giving us a chance as a town to avoid situations or circumstances like we just went through. I'm glad that the investigation didn't find that there was widespread dollars lost by the town. Of course, it was a sampling, so we don't know exactly what may or may not have happened. But at the end of the day, we've got a $350 million budget that this town spends, and not all of it is on a credit card, so I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is that this town is big enough where we need to rely on processes and controls and make sure that we have a repeatable process that will stand up regardless of who's here. So, thank you.
Q. Okay, anybody else on this issue? Thank you.
Can I,
Yeah, that's
I
it. Yeah,
just
go
want to
ahead.
respond
Absolutely.
to two things. One was with regard to the code of conduct. And if you look at the town code, there are, it does make accommodations for a situation where if it's your supervisor, whether that supervisor is the first select woman, a department head, myself, to town attorney, that there's an alternate route to bring that issue to light. So it is in the code of conduct. So if you, if someone it feels like their boss is the one who is involved or potentially perpetrating, that there's another path for them. We are looking at this though, again, I imagine it's been a number of years. It's been in the town code for a long time. But we are looking at this, and I know at the last meeting that, it came up about, the whistleblower, and there is a whistleblower component in there as well, so.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. I think we just need to look at it. It's concerning to me, and I'm not gonna get into it right now, but it's something we need to look at as a group, so.
And I think as we
Go ahead.
talked to the town attorney about this, I think we'll look for his advice as to, if it's something that we think should be changed, what the best, procedurally, what the best way to go about that is, and whether it's through the subcommittee or another body, because I'm not certain that the audit subcommittee or the Board of Finance is the appropriate place for, to spend a lot of time looking at the fraud and code of conduct policies.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think it's, when I read this fraud policy, that's one of the things that concerned me. And, any administration has the right to implement policies and procedures, obviously. I thought it was important to point out this what I perceived as an issue and a problem, and that, and I don't know if the audit committee is the appropriate body to take a look at it, but it needs to be taken a look at. And the reason why you are talking about a financial fraud policy, and we're the Board of Finance and an audit committee related to the Board of Finance. So, but your statements are well taken. I understand them, but it's something that the town should look at. So we'll leave it at that for right now. I just don't want to forget about it. And a year from now, nothing's been done, or 6 months. Mr. DeWitt?
My 2 cents on the audit committee is, the audit committee is like a conduit as far as I'm concerned, right? So we hear Ms. Saxel's, twice a year. But if the audit committee thinks that something needs to be raised to a higher level, I think that's a large part of your job, right? Harkening back to this purchasing policy, this all started with an audit, right? That turned into we don't want this to be an internal audit, we want this to be an external audit, then when Mr. Centofanti got involved, right? So, I think this board definitely has a role in getting those kind of issues from Ms. Saxel to the appropriate end. But I think the audit committee is that conduit, maybe the first pass at, maybe the gatekeeper, right? This one, okay, we're kind of satisfied with all this happened. But there are some that need to go further. And I couldn't agree with Mr. Walsh more. I think all of the audits, frankly, because we've had this issue every time Ms. Saxel comes before us. She said, she says, I did all these great audits. And I'm like, what happened to them? Nothing. And I think there should be a formal disposition on all of them. You know, so Mr. Walsh's comment about wanting a formal response on this particular one, I think is warranted. But I think the audit committee should really think about every one of them. There should be some disposition. If we spent the time and money and the effort to put out an audit, and Ms. Sachs will put some recommendations on, and the administration says, I don't agree with you, we're gonna go different, I mean, there's the disposition, so.
Ms. Claire, go ahead.
So we're at a little bit of a disadvantage as the audit committee because we don't direct Ms. Saxel in what audit she does. That comes from administration. So it's a little bit hard, but what I think we really need to do is review what audit she's done in the past 2 or 3 years and then have her go back and retest to see that everything has been implemented as she expected it would be.
But it is within our control to ask for audits. We don't control her time 100%, but the Board of Finance can say, I would like an audit on this. We've done it before.
The control in the town charter lies with the CFO in terms of internal audits. It's specifically within
You mean
control.
what issues we ask for audits is a CFO control, not the
Correct.
Board of Finance?
Yeah.
Oh.
You have
External.
you have control, right, over the appointment of external auditors, but internal audits lie with the CFO.
Oh, so if we want a real audit, then we gotta hire somebody,
We can,
which is what we did with Senator Latzy, right? So, okay. Okay, I retract my form.
I mean, I would argue that just by the act of hiring someone externally doesn't necessarily make it an external audit. And the external audits are defined differently where they are typically, as is the case with the CAFR, the ACFR, that is something that's required by somebody other than the town. And that's what would be considered an external audit. Just because you want to assign somebody outside of the town to do the audit doesn't necessarily make it an external audit.
all right, well, we've knocked this around a little bit and for further discussion at a future Board of Finance meeting. So anybody else? All right.
Yeah, John, there's gonna
Oh,
be a
sorry,
Board of
Mr.
Finance
Walsh.
meeting about, so there's gonna be a Board of Finance meeting about this?
I'll speak to Ms. Charlton and we can put this on an agenda.
No, I'm not asking for one, but yeah, I thought I heard you just say that. Is there gonna be one or I'm not asking for one. I'm just,
I think we should.
know.
I mean,
I thought I heard you.
I think in the future, should be an agenda item that the whole board discusses.
Okay. I mean, I watched, I attended one of your meetings, one of your audit committee meetings in Maine. I watched the other one. I thought they were well done. So I appreciate you guys doing that. I don't know how much more we're gonna get out of this. However, I was also impressed by the investigation that the administration did, to be quite honest with you. And it was just an investigation. It was not an audit. I keep hearing that name interchangeably, even on this board, call it an audit. It wasn't an audit. It was an investigation. And for all that work to be done over all those months that was invested, and literally the questionable charges, some of which were reimbursed, was $800 something, was something. I was underwhelmed by it, to be quite honest with you. After all of that, so I guess you and Lori will decide where we're going to go next with this. But I think the report kind of speaks for itself. There were some interesting things. I will say there were some interesting things on how money was spent by certain departments that were never talked about at our budget meetings. But whatever. I mean, it's it was interesting reading. But I do think the administration did invest the time, and Ms. Simpson deserves some credit for taking this to the level that she took it, and she seemed to have taken it very seriously. Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on, item number 9, to hear and consider and act upon the draft minutes of September 5th, 2023 and September 19th, 2023. I think we have to separate these because some of us were missing. So can someone make a motion to approve the September 5th, 2023 minutes? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Curley. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Unanimous. One abstention from Ms. Mariam. Thank you. All right, and then can I get a motion to approve the September 19th, 2023 minutes? Mr. Curley, seconded by Ms. Marmion. Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Mr. DeWitt's going to abstain. Okay. Thank you. And item number 10, to hear, consider, and act upon any communications, anything from anybody? Mr. Schmidt, anything?
No, nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Good meeting and a motion to adjourn. Mr. Testani, seconded by Mr. Curley. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Right. So long. See you later, everybody.